hear all about his new own, Glenna Milberg. Although Glenna is a native New Yorker, she has been reporting on South Florida's top stories and community issues for Local 10 News since 1999. So don't do the math, and is a regular host for the Miami Beach JCC Conversation Series. So thank you so much, both of you, for being with us. We will be taking questions from you at home as well, so please use your chat function on Zoom, as well as from our studio audience, and we are going to get started with the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
How's the microphone?
Sounds okay.
So you now are the interviewee instead of the interviewer. How's that going?
Great. So far.
Except when you're the interviewee, one-word answers don't work, as you know, as a television producer. So why, we don't know who read the book and who didn't, and how much you want to give away. I will say I've read some, not all. And so I'm going to ask you a little bit about what I've read. But first, I want to hear what I would characterize as it's kind of a tell-all. Is that valid? It's a tell-all book, a glimpse behind the scenes into a really wacky industry. Why? What made you write it?
Well, Jacques Cousteau once said that if you live an interesting life, it's selfish to keep it to yourself. So when I decided to do this, I was keeping notes for 25 years. A lot of it was stress relief because I'd be in these crazy situations and I would write short stories about what was going on. And I just started accumulating notes over all these years, and I felt that I wanted to share it, and I also wanted to be honest about it. Not tell everything, it's not a tell-all, it's a tell-some. But there's a lot of stuff that I went through that I think would be instructive for young journalists who are coming up to know about. So that's what it is. There's a lot of journalism instruction in the book. So I think that's what I was sort of after in this.
So when you say journalism instruction, I mean, I'll say our industry, we work in, local and national have vast differences in many ways, but the television industry and the reporting industry and producing has a lot of similarities. And it changes by the day sometimes, by the year. I mean, when we got into our respective professions, it was much different than it is now. So you have a young journalist coming into a very digital-driven, audience-driven world right now. Tribal, much more tribal and adversarial than it ever was. What's the top 3 things you tell them?
The most important thing is to learn how to tell a story. And it's amazing how many people don't really know how to do that. I mean, the culture of the moment is tweets, yes, no, maybes. But I learned the art of storytelling working in the Catskill hotels. And for people who don't know, there was the Jewish Catskill hotels, and I was the tennis bro at the Homowack Lodge. And at nights, I used to work the lights in the nightclub. And I would work the lights for Red Buttons, Jan Murray, and of course, Henny Youngman. Henny Youngman told the great joke, "Take my wife, pause, please," or "I'm going to take my wife to a place she's never been before, the kitchen." And those have a beginning, exactly. And those have a beginning, middle, and end. They have a subject, and they give you a sense of a relationship, all in a few words. And when I met Don Hewitt, who created 60 Minutes for the first time, I told him exactly that. And he said, that's how I learned how to tell stories. The comedians in the Catskills were some of the best storytellers in our time. And one of the things that I try to, when I'm sitting with a young journalist, is the art of having a conversation. And that's something that has been lost in the world we're living in at the moment. There's this great movie, My Dinner with Andre, where it's 2 hours and 2 people having dinner. And that is something that in the early days was actually taught in journalism schools, to watch that, how to have a conversation. And that's kind of a lost art. The third thing is make yourself a likable person. People are not just going to give you documents or give you information because, you work for 60 Minutes. Sometimes they do, but they want to see you succeed. They want to see you get ahead. And don't call somebody when you want something from them. And I learned that sitting in front of once a U.S. attorney, and I saw it, the phone rang, and his assistant told him who was on the phone, and I saw his muscles tighten, because he knew this was a one-way street conversation, and the person wanted something, and the U.S. attorney was going to reject it. But what I found is, call them when you don't want something from them. Call them when you want to just pass along a joke, a gossip. If you want to just tell them something, have a relationship with a person. And the art of creating relationships is kind of a lost art in journalism, I think. Most of it is, I'm on deadline, you got to answer this question, give it to me. And, that just doesn't work. And some of I still have relationships with sources that go for decades and decades and decades. One of the stories in the book, for example, it took me, plus, don't rush things. Everyone was in a hurry. It took me 4 years to get John Gotti Jr. to agree to go on camera. And Gotti Jr. at the time was the head of the Gambino crime family. And what I did was I would go down to the courthouse, and as John Gotti tells the story, I started courting him like a bride. And the first time I winked at him, I made the mistake. Yeah, he said he had he came to my retirement party, and this is what he told everybody there. All the producers, Leslie Stoll's here, Bill Whitaker's here. And he stole the show. And what he said was, Ira started courting me like a bride, and he started winking at me. So Gotti turned to his attorney, Charlie Carnesi, and he said, "Who's that guy winking?" And he said, "Oh, that's the 60 Minutes guy, wants to do an interview with you." He said, "Listen, first of all, I'm not doing no interview with a guy who's winking at me. And second, I haven't been in this jail so long that a guy's going to make a pass at me. What's going on?" So I would go down to the court day after day, and I'd wave to him. And then after a while, he'd motion for me to come over to him, and he said, "Anything I could do for you?" I said, "Anything you could do for me? You're in jail. What do you mean, anything you could do for me? I can take care of things. Don't worry about it." And so he said to me, "You know what? You see all these guards here? I tell my lawyers, don't bring me veal parmesan sandwiches. Get me some black hair dye. I want to show that they're not getting to me." And so he would start.
So where was his lawyer?
His lawyer's like right here.
And allowed him just to freely talk to a television producer?
Yeah. I got to know the lawyer too. When I wasn't in court, I was going to dinners with Charlie. May he rest in peace. But so after a while, John started giving me kisses on the cheek, in the court. And then when his supporters, soldiers in the Gambino crime family, dare I say, they saw that the boss is giving me kisses, they started giving me kisses. So after a while, I had to bring a handkerchief to the courtroom to sort of wipe away all the saliva drippings. And we started a relationship. And when John, got out, he was a couple of mistrials, and they never put him away. He and I started having dinners. And, we got close to an interview, then it fell apart, and then got close to another interview. And finally, we're having dinner with Charlie, his attorney, and this guy, Tony. And Tony said no words to me at dinner. He just said one word, flounder, which is what he ordered for dinner. And then afterwards, we go outside. John once again gives me the kisses. And Tony says, "Okay, you're in. When you want to do the interview?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He didn't say a word. He said, "Yeah, but when he started talking about his family, that was the code that you're okay." And so that's how the John Gotti interview happened. And it started off as a double segment at 60 Minutes, and it ended up becoming a full hour. It ended up becoming repeated multiple times. And, it's one of the stories, in my career, I've done a lot, but it's one of the stories I really am proudest of. Because I knew instantly that John was a great storyteller. I mean, he was just a magician with his words.
So were you proud of the story and the entertainment value of it? Were you proud of the public service of it?
No, great question. I was proud of the story. So honestly, I was proud of the story. There's a lot of gangsters who can't put two words together. John was a great storyteller, and he would talk about how his father was in jail. John Gotti Sr., of course, the boss of bosses. And he said when he was released from jail, he rolled down the window, and he was in a black Mark IV car when people didn't have the black Mark IV cars. This is what John was telling. He rolled down the window and says, "Hey, where do we live?" And I pointed to him. And he said, pulled up to the car, and he sort of gave a regal wave, as if he'd owned the place, as if he'd been there forever. And he soon started people putting notes on his car. And he said, my mother didn't really like it because women were giving their phone numbers out. And so he said, what am I supposed to do? How could I help it if I'm so handsome? And so this would be the stories that John would be revealing, and they were great. And it was a great, and so we did the story, and John, of course, he and I kept in touch. And he has a great sense of humor, and what I'm about to tell you is a joke. It wasn't serious. So I said, yeah, I'm negotiating a new contract at CBS. They're breaking my balls a little bit. They're not giving me what I want. He said, I'll tell you what. Tell me who you're negotiating with. Give me a high floor with an open window, and I'll have a deal for you in 30 seconds. I said, no, John, I appreciate the offer. It's cool. He said, no, I could take care of it. I said, no, that's all right. So
you didn't take the offer?
Yeah, I didn't take the offer.
That's a slam dunk.
We should all have agents like that, right?
So can I just go back?
Please.
There's a story that you want to play to the audience. The Kugel story.
Oh, of course. Oh, my God.
Kugel is how you got a job.
Yes.
In the book, I'm looking in the back thinking Mom left the Kugel recipe in the appendix, and it's not there. That would have been a great addition to the book.
You're so right.
Just saying.
But let me tell you what,
Kugel. Does anyone here not know what Kugel is?
We're at a JCC.
Come on. You can be honest.
You know what a Kugel is, right? Yes, okay. You like Parva?
Scared me there, JCC, and someone not knowing what that is.
So
okay.
I was...
Yes.
I was just at the Boca Raton JCC, and I said to the people there, anybody who buys a book gets my mother's Kugel recipe. And let me tell you, there were more people grabbing the Kugel recipe than buying
I told you should have put it in the back of the book.
No, you're right. But here's the thing. I know we're having a conversation. I just want to read 3 paragraphs about what you just asked, because I think the people here would enjoy this. So, my path to 60 Minutes began on June 1980 when the phone rang at my parents' home in Fresh Meadows, Queens. Is this the home of Ira Rosen, the caller inquired. Yes, who are you, my mother replied. I'm Don Hewitt, executive producer of 60 Minutes. Oh yes, I've read about you, my mother replied. You have a lovely wife. Thank you, what are you doing? I'm making a kugel, my mother said. A kugel, God. I haven't had a good kugel in a long time, Hewitt said. You come visit me, I'll give you a kugel, my mother offered. My mother, Ethel, was the quintessential Jewish mother, nagging, judgmental, and someone with all the answers. Actually, I'm looking for Ira, Hewitt said. I'd like to see if he'd be interested in being a producer for 60 Minutes. Oh, he's not interested. He's got a good job, my mother said. Thanks anyway. I listened from across the room to the conversation. I asked my mother who was on the phone. Don Hewitt of 60 Minutes. He wanted to offer you a job, but I told him you already had one, she said. How many jobs do you need? I leapt from the chair and raced to the phone to call Hewitt back. Even though a few minutes had passed, he immediately picked up the phone. He was laughing. I don't know about you, but I like your mother. If you don't want the job, tell her it's hers. So what happened is I then went in to see Don, and I told you a little bit about our conversation, and Don said, it really doesn't matter if I like you. He has to like you. And he was Mike Wallace. And Mike Wallace, in this period of time, was the #1 correspondent on the #1 show in the country, a show that was drawing Super Bowl numbers on every weekly basis.
Iconic.
Exactly. And so Mike looked at my resume, which had less than 6 months of TV experience on it, and he said, this is not very much to be a 60 Minutes producer. And then he looked at me and he said, I know what I could do for you. What could you do for me? And it was a great question. And I noticed he had a tennis ball in the corner of his office. And I said, you play tennis? And he said, what's it to you? And I said, well, I was on the Cornell tennis team. Later, he would tell me that clinched the job for me because he figured he could get 6 months of tennis out of me before firing me. So Don comes in and he said, what do you think? Give the kid a chance? By the way, at 60, they never call you by your name. It's either kid or Young America or something like that. So Mike kind of shrugs, like, I don't give a shit. And so they come back, he gives me a contract, and of course I call my mother right afterwards. I'm so excited. And at that point in time, I'd been bouncing around from job to job. I was, newspapers. And I suddenly am Mike Wallace's producer on 60 Minutes, the youngest producer in the history of the show.
So what, you have it in your head, fake it till you make it? I mean, what was the driving
Well, no. So what
force
happened
there?
was I was 26. And they offered me this job, and I called my mom, and I said, Mom, I was just offered to be Mike Wallace's producer on 60 Minutes. And without missing a beat, she said, Mike Wallace, he's so old. Why can't you work for Dan Rather? So you never please her and stuff.
Your mother needs a segment on 60 Minutes.
So I'm glad you
Right?
said that. No, so after working at 60, I went to ABC, Primetime Live. And
That's our network.
yes,
FYI.
there you go. And I started doing a lot of hidden camera stories. And I noticed when I got there that the cameras were getting smaller and smaller and would allow us to go into places which we previously didn't get into. And a lot of the awards that we started with, it was kind of a very new and novel thing. And we started doing it, and we won every award for a period of years until everybody started copying it. So we were doing a story about diamonds. And what happens is they're telling you they're selling you high-grade diamonds when in fact they're selling you low-grade diamonds. And one of the things that happens is when people bring in a diamond to get cleaned, some unscrupulous people will switch the diamond and give you a lousier or less of a diamond than the one you brought in. And we heard this was going on, but we couldn't get anybody to switch it. And we were marking the diamond with infrared markings to know whether it's our diamond or not. And I said, and the producer, Ann Serkowitz, said to me, they mainly prey on older people. I said, well, fine, let's send my mother in on the cover. And so my mother, wore this outfit that looked like it was from the World War II. She was wearing a beret hat, and so she brought in the marked diamond that we had. And sure enough, in the first try, the guy switched the diamond on her. And Diane Sawyer was doing the piece, and she walks in and she confronts the guy, and had him dead to rights. And my mother, God bless her, said, I don't understand. This is such a beautiful neighborhood. How could something like this go on? Anyway, so she became a star. That piece became one of the most repeated pieces in the history of ABC News.
That's, I'm listening. We can talk all night with your stories. That is a hallmark of a journalism career because it's a storytelling career, obviously. So connect with any journalist and you'll have years of stories to tell. And I know we have an hour or so. But so I want to just sort of get from you a big picture. Your stories on 60 Minutes need to draw the audience. I mean,
Right.
that's a truism. My stories need to draw an audience. Her stories need to draw an audience. And sometimes as a producer, producers in network have a very different role. You run the place at network. A lot of people don't know that. They see Sam Donaldson and Diane Sawyer and Mike Wallace, but you do the stories. And you have to find stories that play well and that will draw the audience. And sometimes those kind of stories are not all that important.
No, you're exactly right. I early on decided I will only do stories I would watch myself. And
what kind of stories would you watch?
Well, I did
a train wrecker story or an engaging story?
I would do engaging stories. I do, like the Gotti story is something I would watch. A person who you don't get normally to hear, a person who's a good talker. One of the things as a producer, we search when we travel around, we try to find the best talkers. And a lot of the newer producers go for the title. And actually one time I remember, and I forgot this lesson. And I had just gone to Israel, and I did a story about Israel's greatest spy who turned out to be working for the Egyptians. And I was so impressed with myself, having got the director of intelligence and all this. And I went to Bob Simon, may he rest in peace, who had been the Israeli correspondent for CBS News for many years. And I told him who I'd got. And he looked at me, he said, he doesn't talk very well. He has this, I said, yeah, but he said, get yourself a colonel. Nobody at home knows the difference between director of intelligence and a colonel. Get yourself a colonel who speaks well, and he'll help your story much better. And I'm like, of course. How did I ever forget that? And Bob reminded me of that. And so it's important to have people who are good storytellers, who are evocative. And it's the job of the producer to kind of flesh that out. And it's not so easy. I've traveled the country to find the right person who could deal with it. When we do a story, let's say an investigative story, you're doing a story about, one of my first stories I did was about the Niagara River up in upstate New York. That was Hooker Chemical was dumping this effluent in there that was poisoning the waters and poisoning the people, and killing the fish and all this stuff. But I couldn't find the right speaker to do it. So I finally found this guy, Walter Hang, who's 24 years old, who was head of NYPIRG in the local area, and he was just brilliant. He was a genius in being able to lay out the issue. So I rejected all the other scientists and big shots and congressmen and senators, and I did Walter. We put Walter on, and it was his first big national, and become a big star in that world. But that's what you want to go for.
Yeah. Sounds like you have time and resources and money.
Exactly.
What's that like?
It's amazing.
That is not the TV world I live in.
Being a 60 Minutes, you're exactly right. Being a 60 Minutes producer is the best job in TV. It may be the best job in journalism. So you get the most time, you get the most expenses to go where you want to go. Your pieces are seen by many people. If your stories are good and you're doing a story that is provocative, change will happen as a result of your story. It's great. And people often ask, well, if you're doing that, what does the correspondent do? And the correspondents on 60 Minutes do between 20 and 25 pieces a year. Producers do maybe 4 or 5. So the producers is going to know more about the story. And the correspondents kind of parachute in, and they rely on the producers for their information. It's not, listen, 2 of my favorite correspondents I've ever worked with in my life were the 2 I worked with last, which was Leslie Stahl and Bill Whitaker. And I love both of them, and they just have so many things going on. But the thing about them is when you're working with a correspondent, it doesn't always go well. Anybody in this room could be a producer if the person shows on time, if they're interesting and funny, and they're talking in sound bites. That never happens. What usually happens is they show up with their attorney who's interrupting every 5 minutes. The person is boring or scared, and you have to somehow figure out how to solve the problem. That's what ultimately producing is, solving problems. It's not unlike, in a weird way, what NASA scientists have to do if there is a glitch in a spacecraft. Anybody could do it if everything's perfect, but that never happens. One of the first stories I did was a story about school violence in Los Angeles, and the story was basically that some local residents were suing the school board, saying it's cruel and unusual punishment to send kids to the schools because they were so violent.
I actually remember that.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Wow. You're dating yourself on that. It was a while ago. So
I've been watching since I was a kid.
Yeah, exactly. So the first person we interviewed was an attempted assault in school, and I forgot the lesson I just told you. It was a very, very bad interview. So Mike Wallace is in the car with me. We're driving down I-5 in L.A., and he's ripping my briefcase apart and throwing papers at me, and he said, "We're going to fire you as soon as you get back. That was a lousy interview. You're wasting my time." And I said, "Mike, the next one will be great." The next one was a girl who was stabbed in school. Her mother insisted sitting next to her during the interview. And every time Mike said, "Can I see the wound?" And so he kept trying to lift her shirt. And every time he did that, the mother would slap his hand. And I said, "Oh my God." And I don't smoke cigarettes, but I bummed a cigarette from a cameraman, and I just left the interview in the middle. And I'm smoking a cigarette outside, and I'm trying to figure out what my next job is going to be, because I know I won't survive the night.
You weren't lifting her shirt. He was.
No, of course. But, he wanted to see where the wound was, I guess. And so what happened was I went outside, and there were a bunch of kids who were attracted to the lights of what we were doing. So I played a hunch. I said, how many people here have gotten assaulted in school? 4 hands go up. How many people did the stabbing? 1 hand go up. So I said, okay, you guys go here. And Mike comes out, and he wanted to fire me on the spot. I said, Mike, ask them who got stabbed in school, who did the stabbing, and follow your instincts. And he kind of had a smile on his face. He said, all right, I'll give the kid 1 more minute of a shot. And so he interviews the kids. Then he gets to the kid who did the stabbing, and he said, you put a knife in someone's belly. You twisted it around. That made you feel like a big man? How old are you? The kid said, 16. 16. You're nothing but a punk. Classic Mike Wallace. We get back in the car. We're driving up the hill towards where we were staying, the Beverly Hills Hotel. And he doesn't say anything for about a minute. And he turns to me and he said, you know, you saved your ass tonight. I said, I know. And that was my first lesson in producing.
So you took a lot of you-know-what from him.
Oh, my God. Unbelievable
Why?
amount. Because I was really ambitious, and I was learning television from the Picasso of television interviewers. I learned the most at dinners with him. Like, for example, we'd be eating dinner, and he said, what's the best question you could ask somebody? I said, why? Why did you kill that person? Because. You killed the person because? He said, it'll take you much further. It'll get much deeper. It'll get into the person's psychology. And so he would teach me these lessons at the table. And the thing Mike did was, you'd write 25 questions to prepare him for an interview. He'd look at him, and then he'd put it under his leg. And then he'd have a conversation like you and I are having. And when the conversation got a little dull and boring, he'd pick up his crib sheet, if you will.
Right.
And he was one of the stories, and I wrote about this in the book. We did a story on the first FBI agent who ever became a KGB spy, Richard Miller. And he was a total idiot. And his attorneys wanted him on 60 Minutes to show how stupid he was, because that was going to be their defense. So he ended up being recruited by this woman, Svetlana, who was a Russian spy. She herself was arrested. And so we did this extraordinary interview with Richard Miller. And now Svetlana had agreed to do an interview, which is amazing, So we go up to San Francisco. We're going to Terminal Island. And I say, Mike, it's a co-ed prison. You got to behave yourself. And he said, I've done this before. I said, I understand. But this was very tough to set up, and you better not screw it up. And he kind of looked at me like I was a fly in a soup. So we get to the prison, and Svetlana was all made up. I don't know how she got made up in prison, but she did. And so Mike goes up to her. He said, co-ed prison? Do you have a boyfriend? Yes, I do. And do you have sex with him? Yes, I do. You must show me where. And the two of them go off. And I'm like, oh, my God. Mike is going to sleep with a KGB agent. This is not good. So there's actually film footage of this. So I'm setting up the chairs.
Wait, did this make the story?
No. Well, so let me finish. Well, it made... I did a story about my favorite stories, and they did something called overtime. So this was the story I'm telling became a 60 Minutes overtime, and they found the footage from that period of time, and they put it in. And so they come back, and Mike says, I had a good time, and she said, I did too. And they're smoking cigarettes, and I said, and they start laughing, and they pulled one over on me. And it was all a setup, but what he did was it created an instant bond with a total stranger. And when we started the interview, Mike and her had this bondship. You have nothing to be embarrassed about being a Soviet spy, do you? No, Michael. They've called you a sex maniac. Do I look like a sex maniac? I wouldn't know. It was classic Mike Wallace. He was at the top of his game, but actually I was at the top of my game. It was one of those stories. It was like a great basketball team where you have 2 great basketball players playing on the same team, and everything is working. The story ended up, it won a lot of awards, but more importantly, it led the season. It was the opening piece in the season's premiere. And when I screened it for Don, he jumped out of his chair, ran towards me if he's going to throw a punch, and he said, don't you dare show me this piece again, because I'll do something stupid and make changes. which I thought was, so amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that kind of story, we call that like a magazine show, right? It's a magazine television show. The interview, I'm listening, my brain is kind of like ticking along. The interview is it. You can't do that magazine piece without an amazing interview. And I want to hear you talk a little bit more about, because here we are, we kind of got a bond going, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
A little bit. We've
Absolutely.
never met before.
No.
We're talking. And
No, you watched the story I did 40 years ago. You're okay. You're good in my book.
But is that by design, or does that just happen? I mean, how is it phony or authentic?
Well, it is authentic. You know, if you're going to be a journalist, a reporter, television correspondent, whatever, you have to generally like the people you're going to interview. I was speaking up in Boca Raton the other day. Boca Raton, JCC.
Were you wearing white shoes?
Huh?
Were you wearing white shoes?
No, is that the thing? You're supposed to wear
Total
white
thing.
shoes? Oh,
Total thing.
I didn't know that. I should have worn the white shoes today. But this David Ehrenberg, who's the prosecutor in Palm Beach County, came to hear me speak, and I had done a story with him about this opiate doctor who was giving out thousands of pills.
I remember the story.
Yes, and that also led the season with Bill Whitaker. It was a great story. But somebody asked, how did you convince the guy to go on camera? And I kind of misremembered. And I said, this is the last chance you're going to have to get your side of the story out. You're going to be in prison for a very long time, and when we leave. And Ehrenberg raised his hand. He said, actually, Ira, what you said was, this is the chance for you to talk to your Jewish mother and let her hear from you how you didn't do the crime. I said, oh yeah, that sounds more like me. So
you were playing him, though.
I was absolutely playing him. But you know what? When I sat down with this crazy doctor, I was trying to find something in him that was likable, that was relatable. And, we're both Yids. And so we both, I tried to appeal. We both have Jewish mother. You certainly heard enough about my Jewish mother tonight. Ethel. And he had one too. And I said, all right, let me see if we could bond over that. And I try to put myself in his place too. If, God forbid, I was thrown in jail for 40 years and, I'd want to have the last word to my relatives.
So you are digging into humanity is what you're doing.
That's what we do. Yeah. We dig into humanity. We try to reveal stuff. And the more we dig and the more we reveal, the more interesting it is. And frankly, the more... you're advancing a cause. And I did a lot of investigations when I was at 60 Minutes, and many investigations, fall on their face. People spend months doing it. Either they read it and then there's no reaction. So one of the things you need to do, I found, is you need to craft a story so that it builds towards getting people pissed off at the end. So one of the last stories I did was on the opiate epidemic and how Congress neutered the DEA at the height of the opiate epidemic, took away all their powers. And I did this collaboratively with the Washington Post. And the Washington Post guys wrote 23,000-word story. And I remember one of the reporters saying, my wife still has no idea what the story is about until she saw your story. And what I did in that story was I let the outrage build. And there was one congressman in the story, Congressman Marino of Pennsylvania, who created the legislation that took the powers of DEA away and then ultimately caused the guy who was doing the job, got him fired. And so Marino did this bill and it passed Congress. And at the very, very end, the last line of the piece was, and Congressman Marino has just been named to be Donald Trump's new drug czar. And it caused literally, people throwing their shoes at the TV, so angry. I got a text that later from Steve Bannon who said to me, Trump just said, Marino's a nice man, and when Trump says you're a nice man, that means you're toast. And sure enough, 2 days later, he was fired. So that story appeared in a variation in the Washington Post. No one remembered it, but that fact that it left an emotional reaction in people, getting people, the viewers at home, pissed off, That's why the guy got fired, and that's why, again, awards are nice, but that became the single most award-winning piece in the history of 60 Minutes. Just because it had a beginning, middle, and end, and by the way, everybody who was involved in putting that bill together ended up going to work for the pharmaceutical industry. It was the total definition of revolving door.
That was, you talk about print and television, each medium has its ups and downs and its positives and negatives, and definitely television is sort of a much more equalizing medium, I think, because we're all just people and we can see each other and hear each other.
A 60 Minutes piece is about 1,200 words. And so
you've counted those words?
Others have, but it's about 1,200 words, 11 to 1,300, depending on, And the Washington Post guys were writing tens of thousands of words, and it was banner headline on Sundays, and no reaction. Wow. So it doesn't matter how many words you're writing, it matters how the impact is. Henny Youngman, Take My Wife, Please. It's a joke that everyone here remembers. It's only a few words, but they don't remember a lot of other things in their life.
Right, impact.
Yes.
So in the last, you brought up Trump and Bannon, and in the last 5-6 years, I don't add well, I'm a journalist. This country has changed so, and the news has changed so. People don't trust the news, are taught not to. What are you finding from your perch about what you do or did, and how you do it or did it, how people react to you in the streets as a journalist? I mean, I've seen a huge change from segments of the population who meet me and automatically don't like me. What?
Agree. And we used to be the fifth estate, and where we righted the wrongs of society, we fixed things, we exposed wrongdoing in nursing homes and VA hospitals, but now it's all changed. Now, because of a narrative that's been put out, we've become the enemy. And unfortunately, I find that a lot of journalists are now having to have a point of view, and a strong point of view to get on TV, like on some of the cable shows, whether it's at Fox or CNN. And I still can't believe that the New York Times allowed the White House correspondent to become a CNN analyst while she's covering the White House, and then criticizing Trump, and then trying to be objective about the coverage of the White House. That is blasphemous.
So, but to your point from before, people watch what makes them mad. Objectivity and nonpartisanship doesn't make you mad. It actually teaches you things.
If you could tell a story, laying out the facts, and one of the things I've always done, like when I did the opiate stories, I spent dozens of hours with the other side, with the McKesson Corporation, Sackler people, the various drug companies and their attorneys, and you want to hear what their views are. And then you say, tell me what point of view you want me to make sure that I get across. And we would do that, and I would absolutely put that in the piece. It's called fair and balanced. Remember when those words were like the first thing you learned in journalism school? That doesn't exist anymore. Fair and balanced is not something that I see watching the cable shows. And, I find that wrong.
Wrong, and, I'll just kind of feed you some rope here, detrimental to our society.
Yeah, and I think that's what's caused the profession of journalism to be looked upon with great skepticism by the society, because they think, oh, you got your views made up and your point of view made up. It was interesting. When I was doing the book, I'll give you this as an example. I was booked on Saturday night. I was booked on the Jesse Waters show, which he's obviously a conservative. The Sunday night, I was booked on Al Sharpton's show, who's obviously a liberal. So and the reason they did it, they felt that I was a fair guy.
So how
I didn't need to.
Was that a totally different interview from one night to the
other? Oh,
other?
totally. Yeah, no, I mean, Waters loved the investigations, loved his background. He used to work with Bill O'Reilly, and he used to sort of run people down in the streets for O'Reilly. So he loved the run and gun stuff, and so we talked a little bit about that. And with Sharpton, we talked about civil rights murders and things like that. But they knew me, and they trusted me, and they trusted the value that I had. And it's only because I don't take sides. And one of the things, and that's something actually I learned from Mike Wallace. People thought, people have asked me, at some of these JCCs, was Mike Wallace a self-hating Jew? Because he did stories that were critical of Israel. Mike Wallace was a great journalist. He did stories that were on point. He was a very active Jew, and he recited the Shema, he said, every night. But nobody really knew where he stood. In fact, Mike was offered the job to be Richard Nixon's press secretary before Ron Ziegler got the job, and he turned it down to be a 60 Minutes correspondent. Good choice. Good choice, right? But his bona fides were in that side of the aisle. But at the other hand, he was accepted by Democrats because he played it fair.
But that was then, though.
He said to me once,
would that play now?
No, well, I would like to think so, but I don't know if it would. To be honest, I don't know if it would. They want to know, are you going to go bash someone or whatever? There are certain subjects, though, I'll tell you, there are certain subjects that cross party lines. And one of the things, like you asked what I was talking about with Jesse Waters, and what I was talking about with Jesse Waters is also what I was talking about with Sharpton. And that has to do with Congress. Both sides hate Congress. And one of the stories I did was on insider trading in Congress. And it was basically about, it was legal for congressmen and senators to learn information in closed-door hearings and then trade stocks on it. So one congressman came up with the idea of creating something called the Stock Act. And it only had 13 sponsors, which is, you could get more for a pie-eating contest than that. And so they did this, and we did the story, and we did an investigation of it, and we found out that one congressman who ran the House Finance Committee got a briefing from Hank Paulson, then Secretary of Treasury, that the economy was about to crater. And then right after that briefing, he went out and shorted stock and made a quick buck. And it turned out he wasn't alone. And then there was Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi and her husband got a preferential IPO from Visa at the same time that there was the credit card legislation that was winding its way through Congress. She and her husband made $100,000 in 2 days on that IPO. And the credit card legislation never went anywhere in Congress. So we did this story, and Pelosi's press secretary at the time, I think actually still there, said, you're not getting an interview. If you want to do an interview, come to a press conference. I said, will you call on us? Yeah. The correspondent was Steve Croft. He sat in the front. I was sitting right behind him. And I knew that Pelosi only takes like 3-4 questions. And I said, I jabbed him in the ribs. I said, raise your fucking hand and ask. And he does. And something amazing happened. He asked about that IPO I just talked about, and no reporters tried to cut him off. They let it happen. And it was 2 minutes of Steve Croft hitting Pelosi hard with these questions. And it went viral. And we did the story. And right after we did the story, it went from 13 sponsors for the Stock Act to 225. The Senate, I had 2 senators fighting with each other who's going to propose the remedial legislation. Barack Obama spoke about it in the State of the Union, and it sailed through Congress. And when the bill was signed, I was sitting here while Obama and Biden are standing here signing the bill. I said, man, this is what journalism's all about, until 2 months later, when Congressman Cantor proposed to repeal the Stock Act. And it was repealed by voice vote, no recorded votes, and it went back to business as usual.
Wow, what was the behind the? Did you ever find out the behind the scenes?
They want to make money. These Congress.
How that in 2 months? How that happened?
Because the congressman said, "Hey, okay, we took care of 60 Minutes, we took care of the bad publicity, Obama's now off our backs on this thing, so now let's get back to business as usual. So you know what happened? So now we have COVID, and congressmen were getting briefed about just how bad the situation was. One of them was Senator Burr. And Senator Burr, after getting one of these briefings, shorted a hell of a lot of stock, sold his stock portfolio, and told his top benefactors, get rid of your stocks, while he was telling the public, you're going to be fine, there's nothing to worry about. And he wasn't alone. There were 24 others who did the same thing. Now they want to bring back the Stock Act. And you know who's been opposing it? Nancy Pelosi. She doesn't want to bring it to the floor. She said, why should we stop congressmen and senators from participating in the stock market? This is the American way.
She's right. This is the American way.
Right. And so
Right.
she was completely criticized for it. And now I think it's eventually going to get back to the floor again. But you asked before about stories that cross both parties.
Yeah.
That gets Democrats angered and it gets Republicans angered. It's a story that kind of, and it's a nonpartisan story. Pelosi happens to be a Democrat, but we also did the same thing with John Boehner, who was at the time the minority leader. And we showed how he was trading in healthcare stocks while there's healthcare legislation that was going through Congress. So you do these stories and they do have an impact. And I think the public, when you do those stories, they trust you. And the best thing that could happen, the thing that I remember the most is getting on the Washington shuttle the next day and hearing people talk about your story on the plane. Did you see 60 Minutes last night? Can you believe they got away with that stuff?
And it's kind of cool because they don't know who you are. So
they have no idea who I am. Yeah.
That's fun.
I know.
Do you ever want to be more notable? Well, now you have a book, so you are notable, but did you ever want to be that face on the air?
No. Well, I'd like the money they make. And I used to be on TV. I used to be on camera. I wasn't very good at it. And so when I was recruited, if you will, by 60, they said, you're not going to be on the air. I said, great. I have a face for radio, I guess. But I said, no.
Makeup and good lighting
it
handles
does
it.
wonders. I know.
Totally
And,
handles
well, it's also, having lit Barbara Walters once or twice. There's a lot more.
Does she use filters?
Yes.
Oh, knew it.
Yeah. The Vaseline filter. Yes.
So, okay.
And
So
also
as long as,
other stuff.
As long as you're getting a little dishy here, I will say, I felt a little awkward reading about some of the things you said about the people you worked with that are icons because they are on air and on, such an important television news program. And you really got a little personal. They're not such nice people in your book.
Well, there are some nice people and there's some
nice people.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a mixture, and I felt that if you're going to say nice things about people who really deserve it, like Leslie Stahl and Bill Whitaker and even Anderson Cooper, it reduces the compliments if you're just nice about everybody. And I've read a few of these journalism memoirs, and everybody's the greatest or whatever, and if they're not the greatest, they just don't make it in the book. So I felt that I needed to tell the truth. By the way, I only told maybe 5% of some of the stuff on people you considered, quote, bad.
Ouch.
And so there's a lot more to it. And probably the one that I wrote the most about was Mike Wallace. And it's in many ways, it's the story of me learning from the Zen master how to do the business, how to do interviews, how to tell stories, how to research stories. But he also was a very abusive man. And he was abusive, obviously he was abusive to me, but he was very abusive to women. And, one of the stories I wrote in the book is a friend of mine who was a female producer there. She was walking by his office one day, and he was bored. And the worst thing you could do is walk by Mike's office when he's bored. And he slapped her in the behind, and she turned and slapped him in the face. And he said, what the hell is her problem? And it's something I never forgot. And I wrote about this in the book, where he used to snap people's bra straps. And I don't know if I was a woman at that time, in that point, whether you asked, why did you stick around? I don't know if I would have stuck around.
I can answer that for you.
Yeah.
It's because that was normal.
Yeah.
That was the norm.
As sick
now,
as it was.
it's not, but
Right.
then it was.
Right, you're exactly right.
As abusive as that is.
Yeah, and my best friend on the show is a fantastic producer, Ruth Streeter. And Ruth not only had to produce amazing stories to keep her job, but she had to put up with all the shenanigans that went on in the office. So she had to work twice as hard as anyone else and put up with as much stuff.
Welcome to our world.
No, and it was completely wrong. And by the way, the women at the time, Ruth didn't report it, or others didn't report it, not because it wasn't happening to them, but because they also made the same decisions that I was making. Yeah. That this is a great job, you're making an impact on society, and you're working with a lunatic, and he'll eventually get his, you hope. But in the meantime, I'm going to try to accomplish something. And it was that kind of formula, and others made other decisions. I know some people left the business; didn't want to put up with it, unfortunately, and others chose to stick it out.
Did you get any blowback from anybody, any of their families, any of them?
Well, when you say you got to understand, I talked mainly about Mike in this thing. I had a relationship with Chris Wallace, who was his son, and I worked with Chris at ABC for a very long time. And Chris and Mike had a very, very difficult relationship, and it was only at the very, very end did they kind of get together, and Mike began to act more like a father than a competitor. So what I said in the book actually is not, I don't want to use the word here, but when Morley Safer did the final interview with Mike Wallace, Morley Safer called him to his face a word that begins with a P. And he said this on the air. And so...
You said it on the air?
Yes. It made it on TV. It's a word I don't even want to repeat now. But so everybody kind of knew, but why would I want to write a book that glorifies the great Mike Wallace without telling the other side of it? And like I said, I say incredible things about Leslie Stahl and Bill Whitaker, and it would diminish how great those people are if I say great things about everybody, which by the way, other memoirs have done. So I made a decision. I'm going to try to be pretty honest without revealing everything.
Would you like to take some questions?
Sure.
Anybody got any?
Yes.
Yell. Project from the back of the room. Oh.
Okay. I actually remember the Stock Act episode as well. I remember watching that one. But my question is a two-part question. When you're sourcing interviewees, or I guess pursuing people that you want to interview, how do you know they're going to be, or do you give them kind of a pre-interview? How do you know they're going to be good on camera, and how do you do that in a way where it doesn't kind of spoil it for the showtime?
Well, you always pre-interview a person to understand, what they're going to say. But what I found that in the pre-interview, they want to get on, some of these people want to get on camera. And so they embellish a little bit, and because they know the camera's not going to be on them. And once when the camera's on, they freeze, or they don't go as far as they told you in the pre-interview. So I've developed, and I've done this maybe 5 times. Bill Whitaker's now stolen what I've said to you. He texted me a little while ago and said, I've used your line recently on an interview. What I do is I stop the interview and I say, hold it. You see all these people here, all the cameras, all the lights, they're all here to hear you. Now, you are not saying what you said to me on the pre-interview, so I'm going to leave. I'm going to have everybody, I can make an earlier flight back to New York. And so I'm going to give you one more chance. We're going to start this interview again. And so if you feel you could do what you said on your pre-interview, we're good. If you can't, no problem. We're headed to the airport. And you know what? They usually come through. And so that's something that I do. And now Whitaker's doing it too. But it's hard. It's hard because, people, when, the lights, the cameras, people get intimidated. They're not used to it. And also some people don't have confidence in verbalizing what they're thinking. There's sometimes a disconnect between this and this. And you have to trust your brain. You have to trust your ideas. And you have to be committed to them. And so, now you have a 60 minutes correspondent in front of you asking you hard questions, and you begin to have some self-doubt. Not a good thing. So that's when you oftentimes stop the camera, and if you don't use the line I just said, what you do is, maybe we should all just take a bathroom break or get some water and get back together again. So you and then you talk off camera with the person.
Chat from Zoom. Someone wants to know, how are stories assigned to different correspondents? How does that all work?
There's a blue sheet system. A blue sheet system is like a quick claim deed. And so if you see a story, you claim the story. And a lot of the producers work with a particular correspondent. And so I worked with, at 60 Minutes, I worked with Mike Wallace. I did a little bit with Morley, and mainly with, then Anderson Cooper, Leslie Stoll, and Bill Whitaker, depending on who I was working with. So you come up with a story idea, and then you have to basically go to your correspondent and say, hey, what do you think about this story? And if they don't want to do it, you don't do it. Now, in some cases, if they don't want to do it, you're allowed to then go to another correspondent and see if they want to do it. But generally, the producer and the correspondent are a team.
So how many of your stories were rejected?
Oh, a lot.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I came up with some harebrained, crazy stories, and
Aren't those the best kind?
Yeah, and they get rejected, and you just move on. You pitch something. There was a great correspondent on CBS. I don't know if you remember him, Daniel Shore. And when Daniel Shore would go in to pitch a story, he'd pitch the boss a story, and he'd pitch it hard. And then then Daniel Shore would reach in this pocket. He said, okay, I got another one. How about this? And then the boss would reject it and said, what's in that pocket? Oh, and I got another one in this pocket. And it became a kind of a running joke at CBS, because Shore always had 5, 6 ideas in different pockets. So after a while, you just say, okay, now what's in the last pocket? And so ultimately you make a decision. But yeah, it's part of the fun. It's a collaboration. You don't want to force a correspondent to do a story they don't want to do. But sometimes, there was a story I did, I don't know if anyone saw it, it was on truffles, the hunt for truffles. And truffles were, I don't know if you know, truffles are hunted by dogs. And
saw the piece.
Huh? Saw the piece. Oh, you did see the, yeah. So they're hunted by dogs, but the story that I did was the Chinese had figured out they had truffles too, but their truffles were being fed to the livestock. So they said, the hell with the livestock, let's send our truffles to France and let's sell it. Now, the truffle, kind of a handful of truffles, black truffles, cost about $1,000. The Chinese truffles cost about $20 a pound. They also taste like rubber. And it's like cheap wine, and trying to put it into a Mouton Rothschild bottle. And the French, some unscrupulous French restaurateurs took the Chinese truffles and sold them to dumb Americans who didn't know the difference. Oh, this truffle is amazing. They put some truffle oil on or whatever. So we did the story. And when I first did it, I did it with Leslie Stoll, and she said, you want me to go all the way to France and Italy to do a story about mushrooms? And I explained it to her, and I said, now the mafia is involved and all this stuff. And I found this incredible restaurateur who said if he reveals too much, he'll get killed. It was just a really classic story. And when I walked into the screening, Jeff Fager, who ran the 60 at the time, said, so is this the mushroom story I'm going to have to sit through? And then he watched the story, and he said, wow, that's a 60-minute story. And so that's like the highest praise you can get. But you have to sometimes fight for these things. And it was
you have vision that
I knew exactly.
They might have at the moment.
You want a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. Too many stories, like when I watch the news at night, World News Tonight or CBS Evening News or Nightly News, I never watch the first 2 minutes because they're basically going to tell me what I'm going to see anyway. So I skip through that. I also generally know, depending on the anchor usually steals part of the story from the correspondent. Peter Jennings was notorious for this. He used to take the top of all the correspondence pieces and then use that as a studio open.
That's lazy.
Exactly. And so the correspondents then eventually started giving him a lousy first draft, so let him steal that. And so what I do is I could watch an evening news in maybe 7 minutes. There's the evening news, really, when it breaks down to it through commercials and teases and all that, is 14 minutes.
Our news hole locally is 18 minutes.
Yeah, there you go. So the network is 14 minutes. And the last piece you kind of know is going to be, some sort of soft feature. But the meat of the show is really 14 minutes. And when you do that, there are all these correspondents out there fighting for the airtime. And so you generally could get through it quicker. If I was doing the evening news today, and I've said this to various people, I would do a cold open. For example, Nora O'Donnell, who's a great correspondent, brilliant woman, she said, we're going to move to Washington. We're taking the CBS Evening News to Washington. You don't know. She's against the green screen. You have no idea. She could be in, Puerto Rico. I mean, it doesn't matter because she's not using the city of Washington in any way, shape, or form. So to differentiate herself from the others. And so, there was a great executive producer, Rick Kaplan. Rick Kaplan, when he ran the CBS Evening News, he used to go to a cold open and said, tonight, right here, and sort of tell you what's going on. At this courthouse, Ghislaine Maxwell is on trial. The jury is out, and they're coming back. And then you go right to the story. There's no tease. You don't waste 2 minutes.
You're watching a show being produced right now in his head. That's pretty fascinating, right?
Yeah, and so you do that, and you go right there, and then you go to a secondary point of view, so somebody sort of disagrees or agrees or whatever it is, and then you go right away to your next story. And before you know it, you're engaged in the broadcast, you're into the show, and you're not doing what I do, which is speeding through it, And so...
See, you're producing for an audience that's used to sound bites and social media and 800 channels to click through. And is that healthy?
Well...
Is that a healthy newscast?
Well, you have to understand... Well, no, it's a great question because you have to... Everybody knows what happened. Everybody is getting alerts. Everybody knows, Tom Brady retired or whatever. And by the time you get on the news, you know what the issue is. So you need to figure out a way to sort of either make it more entertaining, bringing information that they're not getting on their phones. The new thing in our world, your world, is streaming. That's sort of the hot word. Everybody is streaming. Now, the assumption there is that everybody here is going like he's doing now. You're getting the news on the phone, and you're not going to watch the evening news. That you're going to get it all on your phone, and so now we have to get to that viewer who's on the phone. Well, no. If you're going to go for this is my view. It's not. I've talked to the big bosses about some of this.
Tonight, so your view is good.
Yeah. So my view on it basically is when you're watching television, people are approaching it for a different experience. When you look at your phone, you're looking at your phone to get the quick headline, to find out quickly what's going on, weather or whatever it is. And when you're experiencing television, people want to know sort of more information. They want to know you. They want to see you. I'm a big believer in investigative stuff. And I think that should be much more investigations on television. Again, it differentiates a show and a network from the others. How do you differentiate? You got great storytellers. Morley Safer, we were talking about the art of the interview. Morley hated interviews. Morley felt he could always write a story. Morley was probably the greatest, Bob Simon too, were the greatest writers in TV. And they felt they could write their way on any story. And you don't see that much. And so when you're going to watch, whether it's local or network, you got to tell them something that they haven't gotten on their phone. So now it's completely backwards. Now what we're going to do is put the newscasts on your phone, thinking that you're not going to watch TV anymore. This big machine that's in the middle of your living room is not going to be used anymore, and that you're going to get all your news on a phone. I don't buy that. I still think that a good evening news show will deliver a great audience if you could figure out the way to do it. And again, I remember, if I may, Walter Cronkite, Bob Pierpoint, Daniel Shore, Leslie Stahl. I mean, the greatest the lineup was a murderer's row of correspondents, and people tuned in to hear what those correspondents had, because they were great reporters, and they brought something that no one else had. They were rock stars, and you're not seeing that. They're not...
Well, here's why. They got to that position after serious time in the industry, serious work, proving themselves, learning. Now, the news industry is hiring a lot less experienced, a lot younger.
Right.
And the content is easy for those people to do without, no disrespect to them, talented people, no doubt. But the content that the audience demands from those kind of newscasts that is delivered is kind of meaningless in many ways.
No, you're right. I mean, I've seen the way they assign stories. So it's like, okay, there's, earthquake or...
Would Leslie Stahl get a job in TV news now?
Not at the age of 80.
Although she rocks at the age of 80.
She is beyond belief.
Yeah.
She's, I don't want to insult Bill Whitaker, but she's my favorite. And you know why she's my favorite? Because when you work with Leslie Stahl, Leslie is very dedicated to her family. She's got a husband that's not well, and she leaves the office exactly at 5 o'clock to be home with him, to have dinner with him every night. Every night. You could be in the middle of a sentence, that 5 o'clock hits, goodbye, I'm gone. Boom. And that's her dedication. And that is what's most important. She wrote a book about being a grandma. It was a great book. And so she is really dedicated to her family, and she's a great journalist. And if you have a bad screening, she says, okay, let's roll up our shirts and let's get to work. She doesn't say, sorry, I got a lunch I have to go to.
Unless it's 5 o'clock and she's got to go.
Well, that's different. But we all know the rules there.
Yeah.
And so you just try to get it done before Leslie has to go. And because she set that boundary, everybody kind of works with that,
She walks the walk.
She's just brilliant.
What else?
She's brilliant.
Anyone else? Jerry, please.
I'm just kind of curious. So it was a great opportunity to sit here and listen to your history and your experiences, et cetera, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. And so what's the next chapter for you?
Well, I was just telling a friend of mine that, when you have the career I've had, and now that, I was lucky to have my last story was the opiate industry, I'm getting a lot of offers every week. And one of the things, I've been hustling since I've been 16. I was a busboy in the Catskills. And, for me, it's a 50-year hustle. And it's just great to now sort of sit back and think. And I'm now involved with a group of, so there were two things that I said yes to. I had about probably 20 different opportunities. Two of them I said yes to. And one of my closest friends is Barry Scheck, who created the Innocence Project, which has gotten wrongfully convicted people out of jail. He's one of the unsung heroes of America for the work he's accomplished. So they approached me at one point to create a television show about wrongfully convicted. And so I worked on that briefly. And then the other one is the infrastructure bill that just passed Congress, $2 trillion that they're giving out without any auditing. And I've gone through the bill. There's 7 words in that infrastructure bill that has to do with an audit. And no U.S. senator or congressman said, I think we got to put more auditors in this thing and put an inspector general, make sure the money is not being misspent. So I'm working with a group of people who, by the way, never would return my phone call when I was a journalist, who are ex-CIA, FBI, and interesting folks, and I'm working with them on investigating the infrastructure bill and where the money is going. And that just interests me because I'm working with this group of people, which is kind of like a Mission Impossible crew, an incredible group of folks that I'm learning something from every day.
That sounds like a 60-minute story right there.
It's planetary. 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 Meaning that everybody's on Zoom, calls from different parts of the world. Anyway, listen, we thank you so much. I think we're over time.
That's
We're
called
in
a big
overtime.
wrap.
No, I see.
The big rap is coming right back on stage. So no, I want to thank both of you. This was you had a really great chemistry here. I hope that this was one of your favorite JCC events. Can we say that?
Absolutely.
Yes. An intimate conversation, and we appreciate everybody who's here. We hope to see more of you. Please come back. We're going to
And I'm going to sign books in the back.
And he is signing books in the back.
I'm going to sign some extra ones for everybody who's at home. They could come in and purchase
purchase them right here. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and come back. We'll be here. Thank you.